In the summer of 1983, 5 cousins vanished without a trace while playing on their grandparents' farm in rural Texas. The only thing they left behind was a red sneaker by the old cistern. 41 years later, a routine plumbing repair led to a discovery so horrifying it would reopen the coldest case in the county's history and reveal a secret the family had buried beneath generations of silence. Subscribe for more real crime-inspired stories like this one, twisted secrets, forgotten evidence, and the shocking truths that refuse to stay buried. March 14th, 2024. Location: Split Creek, Texas. The only reason anyone found them was because the toilet wouldn't flush. At 3:42 p.m., an independent plumber named Jacob Trillo opened the cap on the corroded cistern beneath the southeastern corner of the barn. He expected backed-up sludge, maybe a drowned raccoon. What he didn't expect was a human jawbone, still attached to a child's skull, wedged between rusted pipework and a tangle of sun-bleached fabric. Within 2 hours, the entire Carter farm was cordoned off. By sundown, the sheriff's department had uncovered 4 more skulls. All belonged to children. The cistern hadn't been in use since the 80s, and nobody in town had seen the Carter children since the summer of 1983. July 16th, 1983. Location: Split Creek, Texas. The sun had barely crested over the mesquite trees when the 5 Carter cousins scattered across the back pasture like wild birds. They'd been up since dawn, barefoot, sticky with sweat, shrieking laughter that rolled over the dry grass. Their grandmother, Bertie Carter, called after them from the porch, waving a wooden spoon still slick with bacon grease. "Stay where I can see you, and keep away from the well." But they didn't listen. Not really. Not when the summer sky was cloudless and wide, and the pasture behind the barn promised adventure. It was the kind of Saturday that split July in 2. By sunset, every one of them was gone. The 5 Carter children were all under 12. Casey, 11, was the oldest, a wiry, freckled ringleader with scraped knees and a mouth full of jokes. His sister, Annie, was 9, quieter, always trailing a step behind, eyes trained on the dirt for shiny rocks or caterpillars. Benji, their 8-year-old cousin from Odessa, was all elbows and energy, the kind of boy who built slingshots out of tree bark and rubber bands. Darla, 7, had just learned to braid her own hair and had done so that morning in lopsided ropes. And Caleb, the youngest at 5, still spoke with a lisp and carried a blue stuffed dog named Rupert everywhere he went. They were last seen around 9:30 a.m. by a field hand named Rowdy Gaines, chasing each other toward the rear tree line, where the Carter property met the dry creek bed. He'd wiped his brow with a diesel-stained rag, squinting into the sun. "Said I seen 'em runnin'," he told police later. "Didn't think nothing of it." But by lunchtime, Bertie noticed the silence. No stomping on porch boards, no screen door slamming, no hollers asking for lemonade or peanut butter crackers, just cicadas and the hum of the box fan in the kitchen window. The 911 call came at 12:17 p.m. Bertie's voice trembled as she gave the dispatcher her address on Farm Road 86, halfway between nowhere and Split Nothing. They just vanished, all 5 of them, my babies. By 2 p.m., Sheriff Buck Halpern and his 2 deputies had arrived, sweat already staining their uniforms. Halpern was a week away from retirement. His plan had been to spend the afternoon watching the Astros game with a cold, lone star. Instead, he stood beside the Carter family's rusted Ford tractor, staring out at a vast field of empty. Dogs were brought in, neighbors too. They searched the barn, the hayloft, the corn crib, the woodshed, even the creek bed. Caleb's stuffed dog was found at the fence post by the cistern, one blue ear torn clean off. That was the only thing they ever found. The cistern itself was sealed tight. A circular iron cap sat welded into the concrete with no visible seams. According to Bertie's husband, God rest his soul. It had been sealed since 1974, after the well water turned foul. A new tank was installed behind the house, and the old cistern became just another relic of the past. Ignored, grown over with brittle weeds, too heavy to move and too useless to matter. But folks remembered the warnings. "Don't play near the well," they used to say. "Too deep, too dark, too easy to fall." Some whispered about old stories, old ghosts, old wrongs buried with the water. But those were just tales, until the children went missing. Then, the whispers got louder. TV crews showed up by the third day. "5 missing cousins baffle Texas town," the headline read across the screen, accompanied by faded photos and panning shots of the dusty fields. Volunteers came from as far as Lubbock and Amarillo. Helicopters buzzed overhead. The Red Cross brought sandwiches and tents. Men in black suits with no badges interviewed Birdie for hours at a time. Someone accused Rowdy Gaines. Someone else blamed the carnival that had passed through the week before. But nothing stuck. And then the trail went cold. No ransom note, no sightings, no bodies. Just 5 kids, gone from a field in daylight, with no explanation. In 1984, the FBI scaled back. By 1986, the reward money dried up. By 1988, the Carter family had moved off the farm, unable to bear the silence. But Birdie stayed behind. She said she couldn't leave them. In 1993, the cistern was finally resealed by the county, after a new ordinance required old wells and pits to be registered or closed off permanently. Nobody opened it, though. The paperwork was more about liability than curiosity. And Birdie? She sat on that porch until she died in 2023, aged 91, blind and silent. She never stopped setting out 5 plates at Sunday lunch. Until the plumber came in March 2024, nobody had touched that cistern in over 40 years. And the bones he found? They didn't match the missing children. Not all of them. Some were older, much older. March 15th, 2024. Location: Split Creek, Texas. The first thing Detective Mara Vance noticed when she stepped onto the Carter property was the silence. Not the quiet of a slow town or the hush of an empty house, but the heavy, loaded silence of disturbed ground. The barn loomed in the distance, its rust-colored tin roof sagging under decades of heat. A backhoe sat parked beside the open cistern, yellow arms frozen mid-dig, like a creature caught in the act. Crime scene tape flapped in the wind. Uniforms milled around with clipboards and evidence bags, all of them pausing slightly as Mara passed, giving her the nod reserved for cold case reinforcements. She was good at her job. Too good. That's why she was here. They'd called her in the night before, after local deputies uncovered a second partial skeleton. This one much smaller than the first. The bones were delicate, bird-like, juvenile, femur not yet fused, skull missing its lower jaw. Sheriff Dan Hargrove, Halpern's successor, now grayer and more bureaucratic, had nearly dropped the phone when the forensics lab called in the preliminary assessment: child remains. Estimated death, 1980s. Vance knelt by the edge of the cistern. The cap had been cut open along its weld line, revealing a gaping circular pit lined with wet stone and rusted pipes. A sour, mineral smell rose from the dark. She pulled on gloves. "Tell me what we've got," she said to the nearest tech, a woman named Lydia Reyes, who held a clipboard against her chest like armor. 3 skulls so far, Reyes said. 2 confirmed juvenile. 1 older, maybe late teens or early 20s. Multiple long bones, clothes in pieces, and... She hesitated. "We found toys, plastic pieces, decayed cloth, a child's shoe." "Anything modern?" Reyes shook her head. "Everything looks old. Vintage. The materials predate 1990. One of the dolls is stamped 1981. Vance straightened, heart tightening. DNA testing will take time, Reyes added. But the sizes line up. 5 missing cousins, Vance said, from this exact property, in daylight. Inside the barn, a makeshift command post had been set up. A table held a weathered manila folder labeled Carter Case 1983. Closed. Vance flipped it open. The original statements had been typewritten. Sheriff Halpern's notes in blue ink bled through the years. Bertie Carter reports 5 children last seen heading east through the pasture toward Old Fence Line. No sign of struggle. No footprints beyond the dry patch near cistern. Dog located at base. Torn ear. No blood. Area searched with dogs. No scents detected beyond 50 yards. Cistern cap noted. Sealed. No visible access. Lead. Traveling carnival. Cleared. Lead. Rowdy Gaines. Cleared. Lead. Abducted by unknown third party. Unconfirmed. Case status as of December 1986. Inactive. Presumed lost. Vance scanned down the page. One word circled in red caught her eye. Unfounded. She snapped the file shut. By 3 p.m., the full excavation was underway. Archaeologists from the university had been called in to assist, brushing soil gently from the curved edges of bone. Vance watched as one lifted a decayed cloth scrap with tweezers. It was white with faint pink polka dots, the remains of a child's nightgown. Then one of the deputies called out from inside the barn. "Detective, you might want to see this." The floorboards behind the barn's feed room had been pulled up, revealing a line of ancient plumbing, a corroded pipe, capped and welded shut. It shouldn't have connected to anything. The cistern had been sealed for decades, but someone, recently, had cut into the line. Vance crouched and traced the connection. A narrow PVC pipe, newer than the rest, had been added beneath the feed trough. It looped in a way that suggested intentional drainage, or insertion. "What is this?" she asked. The deputy shrugged. "Not sure, but the plumber, Jacob Trillo, he said the pressure issue in the farmhouse only started 3 weeks ago." "Backflow?" Vance asked. "No," the deputy said grimly. "Squeaking, like air, like a noise was trying to push through the pipe." She visited Jacob that night. His house sat on the edge of town, beside the only gas station still pumping leaded fuel. He answered the door with tired eyes and a guilty expression. "I didn't know what I was looking at," he said, when she showed him a photo of the jawbone. "I thought maybe a pig skull. You know how things fall in old tanks, but it didn't look right." "And the pipe?" "I didn't install it," he said. "But I noticed the squeak, like air was trapped. You know how something gets in the line and makes a sound every time you flush? It wasn't mechanical. It sounded like—" He stopped. "Like what?" Jacob swallowed. "Like a voice. Real faint. Just a few times. A whisper under the water. Couldn't make out words." Back in her motel room that night, Vance spread out the photos from the excavation. 5 skulls, 1 child's toy, 1 blue fabric scrap, possibly Rupert the stuffed dog, and now, possibly, a 6th set of remains. That didn't match any of the Carter kids. The cistern was becoming something more than a grave. It was a pattern, a dumping ground. And someone had sealed it, very deliberately. She circled one name in the original case file. Samuel Carter, Bertie's husband, the man who sealed the cistern in 1974. 9 years before the children vanished. 9 years before anyone was supposed to be down there at all. March the 16th, 2024. Location, Split Creek, Texas. They buried Samuel Carter on a rainy Tuesday in 1991. In the family plot behind Split Creek Baptist Church. There was no obituary, no eulogy, just the sound of rain on Pine and Bertie Carter's soft humming. An old hymn, wordless, almost trance-like. He died of a stroke, according to the death certificate. Massive, sudden, and unaccompanied. Bertie said she found him in the barn, slumped against the workbench with dirt on his boots and dried blood in his beard. But something about his timeline never made sense. Detective Mara Vance sat in the dimly lit back room of the Split Creek Public Records Office, the stale scent of mildew and old carbon paper thick in the air. On the table before her, boxes labeled Carter's S 1970s permits, well registrations, and one tagged Complaints, Rural Properties. She sifted through yellowed files, ignoring the creak of the oscillating fan overhead, until she found it. Permit number 88734, Water Containment, Sealing Date, July 10th, 1974. Applicant Samuel Carter, address 415 County Road 11. Notes: request to seal inactive cistern. Water deemed non-potable due to bacterial bloom and animal contamination. Sealed with reinforced steel plate. Inspection waived per county code due to rural exemption. Waived. No follow-up. No documentation of what was inside when it was sealed. The document was signed, but not by a county inspector. It was co-signed by a neighbor, a man named Lowell Vance, her father. Mara drove to her father's house outside Arlen that night, headlights cutting through the humid dark. Lowell Vance was 81 now, lean, sharp-eyed, a retired land surveyor who never let go of his boots or bourbon. He sat on the front porch as if he'd been waiting for her. "Saw your truck pull in," he said, raising a brow. "I figured it was either you or the tax man." Mara didn't smile. "I need to ask you something about Samuel Carter." Her father's face went still. She sat beside him, letting the crickets fill the silence. "You signed off on a permit," she said. 1974, cistern sealing." Lowell rubbed his weathered jaw. "I remember. You weren't a licensed inspector." "I wasn't, but out here back then, paperwork didn't matter much. Sam wanted it sealed, said the water turned bad. He had it covered in thick steel, poured concrete all around." "Did you ever see what was inside before it was sealed?" Lowell took a long breath. "Number." "He wouldn't let me look." "But you helped him anyway." Lowell turned to face her. "He paid me $50 and 2 bottles of Glenlivet. Back then that was worth something." Mara stared at him. "He was nervous," Lowell continued. "Not scared, just jumpy. Wouldn't let his kids go near the barn. I figured it was animal remains. Maybe a calf fell in, or something worse. But I didn't ask." "And you never thought about it again," she said. "Not until those kids disappeared," he said quietly. "And by then, Sam was already different, distant." Back at the station, Vance pulled the Carter family tree from the cold case archives. Samuel and Bertie had 2 sons, Thomas and Will. Both had left Split Creek by the late 80s. One moved to Colorado, the other to Mobile, Alabama. Neither had returned after the children vanished. Neither had spoken to the media. Neither attended Samuel's funeral. And both had children among the 5 who disappeared. The only one who stayed was Bertie. Mara underlined the sons' names. She needed to find them, because whoever had been near that cistern in 1974, they knew what was inside, and it hadn't been just bad water. Later that afternoon, the university team excavated the lowest layer of the cistern pit. The tech called Vance over with urgency in his voice. "Detective, you'll want to see this." She peered over the edge. Beneath the settled earth, hidden between 2 slabs of sunken concrete, was a metal container, badly corroded but intact. It was a toolbox, the kind with a sliding lid and a handle worn smooth by work-gloved hands. Vance dropped to her knees as they carefully opened it. Inside, a bundle wrapped in oiled canvas, sealed with brittle tape. The team unfolded it slowly, layer by layer, revealing contents that made Vance's chest tighten. A rusted pocket knife with initials SC carved into the hilt. A water-warped Polaroid photo. A line of children standing beside the barn, all smiling but with blanked-out eyes, scratched through with something sharp. A notebook, its first page water-damaged but legible. July 11th, 1974. It's done. No one will ever find them. The hole took 3 days to dig. Covered the sounds best I could. Buried deep. Used the steel plate like Mr. Vance said. Told Birdie the smell was the water. They'll rot under God's eye. Let him judge me. Mara read the line twice. No one will ever find them. But who had Samuel Carter buried 9 years before his own grandchildren disappeared? And more importantly, how many more were there? As the sun dipped over Split Creek, casting long shadows across the pasture, Mara stood alone beside the edge of the cistern. She could feel it now. This wasn't just a burial site. It was a ritual space, a pattern. The Carter children weren't the first, and maybe they weren't even the last. March 17th, 2024. Location, Split Creek, Texas. By sunrise, the Carter property was under full lockdown. Yellow tape stretched from the barn to the back fence line. Crime scene lights bathed the dry ground in a sterile white glow. The soil around the cistern had been dug up to a 15-foot radius. What had once been wild mesquite brush and brittle grass was now a cratered pit of exposed earth. Detective Mara Vance stood at the edge of the dig site, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the ground. "Start again," she said. The archaeologist beside her nodded. His name was Dr. Elijah Mott, a forensic anthropologist with the university. Thin, intense, fastidious. He pointed to a flagged area near the southwest corner of the pit. "This is where we found the most recent layer," he said. 2 child-sized femurs, consistent with the Carter children, but beneath that, at a deeper layer, we found something older. He knelt, brushing at the dirt with a soft brush. A faint outline began to emerge. A circle. No, a series of circles. Concentric. Etched or pressed into the soil by something rounded and heavy. A groove roughly 6 feet wide at its largest. "It's not natural," Dr. Mott said. "Too uniform. And look here." He swept away more dirt to reveal a pattern of small crosshatch marks, spaced evenly around the inner ring, like clock ticks. "Someone made this," Mara murmured. "We think it was a container, maybe a barrel, heavy enough to imprint the ground and left long enough to settle. Could have been used to store." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Mara stared down at the pattern, her mind racing. "How deep?" "We estimate this layer dates back to the early 1960s, maybe late 50s. We've only started to excavate." Mara stepped back. "What about bone fragments?" Mott hesitated. "So far, we've recovered a partial mandible, adult, a tooth still embedded." "Any matches in the missing persons database?" "We're running it now." Back at the station, Mara opened the missing persons files again. This time, she filtered for Split Creek and surrounding counties. Pre-1983. Children, rural properties. One name caught her eye. Ava Landry, age 10. Vanished, July 3rd, 1962, last seen. Walking home from vacation Bible school residence, Willow Bend Road, 4 miles from Carter Farm case. Status, unsolved. She flipped to another. Marlon Briggs, age 7, disappeared, September 1967, last seen, riding his bike down County Route 19. Bike never recovered, no witnesses, property line adjacent to Carter fence. There were others. 3 children in total between 1959 and 1972. All vanished in the same 6-mile radius. All unsolved. Nobody had ever linked them to the Carter family. Until now. That afternoon, Vance called a meeting in the converted office space behind the station. The dry erase board was covered in photographs, timelines, and terrain maps. At the center, a 50-year-old aerial photo of the Carter farm. She pointed to the old barn. "Every victim we can tie to this land, whether they disappeared in 1983 or 1962, connects back here." She moved her marker to the southeast quadrant. "This is where the cistern is." But look here. She tapped the map just west of the barn. This used to be the original well, sealed off after the new cistern was installed in 61, 2 containment systems, she said. One buried, one visible, both now potential grave sites. One of the deputies, Rosales, leaned forward. So what are you saying? That Samuel Carter was using them as a dump site for bodies? I'm saying someone was, Mara said. Maybe more than one person, and I don't think it ended with him. She pulled up a second image, an annotated site diagram from the excavation. We now have evidence of layered burial activity, spanning at least 3 decades. The Carter children may be the most recent victims, but the pattern suggests a history. Deputy Marks, younger, skeptical, raised his hand slightly. But why the kids? Why just children? Mara turned to the board, circled a word written in thick red ink. Control. Someone wanted control, she said. Someone saw this land as more than a home, as a system, a space where they could do whatever they wanted, and no one would ever know. By dusk, a breakthrough came. The forensics lab called with a preliminary dental match on the mandible from the lower layer. Ava Landry, gone 62 years, now confirmed to have died beneath the Carter farm. Mara felt it like a punch to the ribs. She dialed the Landry family number from the old case file. A grandson picked up. The mother had died 10 years ago, still believing Ava had run away, still setting a place for her at Christmas. When Mara hung up, her hands were trembling. The gravity of it all was sinking in. That night, she drove back to the farm alone. The dig site sat quiet beneath the moonlight. Crickets buzzed. A coyote howled in the far hills. She stood at the edge of the cistern, staring down into the blackness. They'd removed the bodies, bagged the evidence, closed the site for the night. But the hole still yawned open, hungry, like it wanted more. Mara crouched beside the rim, pressed her palm to the dirt, and whispered, "Who are you?" There was no answer, but deep beneath the soil, there had been a system, a method, a message. She just hadn't cracked it yet. July 1983/March 2024, location, Split Creek, Texas. Then, July 1983. The Carter house felt heavier that summer. Even before the children vanished, something hung over the property like heat trapped under tin. The kind of weight you didn't notice until you stepped outside and breathed easier. Inside, the adults spoke in hushed tones. Bertie Carter cooked too much, like she was trying to fill the silence with the smell of cornbread and stewed okra. Samuel stayed out in the barn, working, he said, hammering, cutting boards, fixing things no one had asked him to fix. Neighbors said it was just stress. The Carter's sons had both returned for the summer, each bringing their children while their wives were resting back home. Bertie never talked about it, but folks whispered. Something had happened in Mobile, something worse in Colorado. By July, all 5 Carter grandchildren were under one roof. Casey, Annie, Benji, Darla, and little Caleb. Ages 5 through 11. All blonde, all pale, all with that soft-spoken Carter drawl. They played in the fields behind the barn every day. And then, one morning, they didn't come back. Now, March 2024. Detective Mara Vance sat in a windowless room at the Split Creek Public Library, surrounded by boxes labeled Split Creek Ledger, 1975 to 1990. She wore gloves, sipped cold coffee, and read every line. Obituaries, police blotters, church announcements. She was looking for anything, anyone who might have noticed something during the summer of '83. And then she found it. August 10th, 1983. Letter to the editor. Something's not right at the Carter place. We all feel it. The barn light's been on past midnight. Bertie doesn't go into town no more. The preacher says she won't take communion. I saw Samuel burn something behind the shed 3 nights after the kids vanished. He said it was animal feed gone moldy, but it smelled like chemicals and wet cloth. I think someone ought to look closer. Name withheld by request. Mara slammed the paper shut. Her pulse quickened. This wasn't just folklore. Someone had tried to raise the alarm, and someone buried that letter in the archives. She brought it to Sheriff Hargrove that afternoon. He was standing in the evidence room, overseeing the logging of items from the dig site. Fabric scraps, Polaroids, the rusted toolbox. He read the letter twice, then looked at her. You think Samuel Carter killed his grandchildren? I think it started long before them, she said. And I think someone helped him cover it. Hargrove folded the paper. If we charge a dead man, we don't get justice. We're not just charging him, she said. There's more to this. There's someone else. The pattern didn't end in 1983. He raised a brow. You think there's a second perpetrator? I think there's a legacy. She returned to the Carter farm late in the afternoon. The sun was dropping. The air smelled of disturbed dirt and dry grass. Deputy Rosales waved her down at the fence line. Detective, he said, pulling a small box from the back of his cruiser. One of the volunteers found this buried in the back shed, between the rafters. He opened it. Inside, a stack of VHS tapes wrapped in plastic. Mold crusted the corners, but the labels were still legible, all dated between 1979 and 1983. One simply read, Darla. July. Mara's stomach turned. She took the box, returned to her car, and drove straight to the station. They didn't have a working VHS player in evidence processing. Most departments had moved digital years ago, but the high school still had one in the AV closet. The janitor let her in after hours. In the dark media room, she fed the tape labeled Darla July into the machine. The screen flickered. Lines of static crawled. Then, a child, about 7 years old, sat on a wooden chair in the barn. Sunlight spilled in through the slats. She was crying softly, wearing a yellow sundress. A man's voice, off camera. Tell the camera your name. Darla Carter. And where are you? In the princess room. Mara froze. That phrase again. Princess room. The same words found on the Carter children's tapes. The camera zoomed in on Darla's face. She had a scrape on her cheek. Her eyes darted toward something off-screen. The tape cut to black. No violence. Nothing explicit. But it was enough. Enough to prove they'd been recorded. Enough to reopen the investigation as a child exploitation case. By the time she returned to the station, a federal agent was waiting. Special Agent Leah Dobbins. Tall, sharp. No nonsense. We're opening a task force, Dobbins said. You'll be looped in, but from here on out, this is multi-state. Why? Because these tapes, she said, gesturing to the evidence bags, match others found in Amarillo, Baton Rouge, Hendersonville, all marked with similar handwriting, same camera style, same labeling system. Mara swallowed. How many tapes? Dobbins didn't blink. We've identified at least 62, all from different children. But the Carter family? May have been the source, Dobbins said. But someone distributed them. Outside, the wind kicked up dust in the dark. Mara stood in the parking lot, watching the sky. A storm was coming, and she had the terrible sense they were only just beginning to understand how far the roots of this thing went. March 18th, 2024. Location, Split Creek, Texas. They said Bertie Carter never left the farm. Not after the children vanished, not after Samuel died, not even after both of her sons stopped speaking to her. For 40 years she lived alone on that sun-bleached land, tending a dying garden, rocking on the porch, her gray hair pinned up like it always had been. Neighbors called her strange. Others called her broken. But Detective Mara Vance now understood something chilling. Bertie Carter didn't stay because she was grieving. She stayed because she was watching. Bertie had passed away the year prior. July 2023. No funeral, no obituary. The county handled the burial. No next of kin had come forward, but her house remained sealed, untouched since her death. Now, with a search warrant in hand, Mara stepped over the threshold for the first time. The house smelled like dried herbs and old paper. Dust shimmered in the late afternoon light. Everything was just still. No signs of struggle, no sign of life either. Just a time capsule, a shrine to something no one had dared name. Bertie's bedroom was at the back of the house. The walls were lined with photographs, framed portraits of children in outdated clothing, some of them recognizable from the Carter family albums. But others, Mara didn't recognize. Names were scratched into the bottom corners of some frames: Eva, Marlin, Jolene. All names Mara had found in the cold case logs, all children who had gone missing in the surrounding counties over a 25-year stretch. Mara's breath caught. Bertie had kept their pictures, framed them, preserved their names, like they belonged to her. On the nightstand sat an old composition notebook, its edges curled and brittle. Mara opened it carefully. Inside were dozens of pages in Bertie's neat cursive. Each began with a date, followed by what looked like meal logs. May 4th, 1981. Oatmeal, milk, apple slice. No talking today. May 5th. White bread, peanut butter, weak tea. Spoke Eva in sleep. May 7th. Skipped breakfast, refused to wear dress, punished. Mara flipped further. The entries continued, sporadic, increasingly erratic. August 9th, 1983. All 5 cried again. Samuel angry. Locked cellar. My hands shook too much to braid Darla's hair. August 10th. Made them kneel. Samuel said the circle must be respected. We are the keepers, not killers. Keepers. Mara slammed the book shut. She didn't know whether to scream or cry. Bertie hadn't just known. She had been part of it. Later that night, back at the station, Mara sat in her office surrounded by evidence bags, photos, tapes, meal logs, and now ritual references, keepers, circles, obedience. She wrote a single word at the top of her whiteboard: C-U-L-T. What had seemed like a twisted predator's graveyard was starting to look like something structured, organized, believed in. She remembered the phrase from Bertie's journal: "The circle must be respected." And something clicked. The next morning, Mara called Dr. Elijah Mott at the dig site. "You mentioned finding marks around the base of the pit," she said. "Etched patterns. Could you be more specific?" "We assumed it was containment," Mott replied. "But now, I'm not sure. One of the students thinks it's symbolic, maybe ritualistic. I can send photos." Within an hour, Mara was staring at a high-resolution image of the pit, etched into the soil around the base of the cistern. A pattern of spirals, interlocking loops, and in the center, 5 small symbols arranged in a circle. 5, not 6, not 4. 5, like the Carter children. Back at the farm, another search team had uncovered a small trap door beneath the floorboards in the kitchen pantry. It was barely 2 feet square, hidden beneath a false panel. A ladder descended into what appeared to be a root cellar. Mara climbed down. The space smelled of mildew and dust, but it was dry, preserved. The walls were lined with shelves, rows of old cassette tapes, notebooks, and what looked like handwritten Bibles. Except the verses had been altered, the names replaced, familiar scripture but twisted. "And unto the keepers were given the little ones, and they shall not pass from this circle lest the world be unmade. The earth will take what the womb rejects. Only the pure may descend." Mara's stomach turned. It wasn't just sickness. It was doctrine. Bertie and Samuel hadn't acted alone. They had faith in what they were doing. And there were names, other keepers, listed in the margins. One caught her eye. T. Carter, Mobile Branch. Samuel and Bertie's son. Thomas, father to 2 of the missing children. Still alive. Still out there. That night, Mara sat in the parking lot outside the sheriff's office, phone in her lap, fingers trembling. She had the number. Thomas Carter had never returned to Split Creek after the children disappeared. Never answered media. Never responded to law enforcement inquiries. But he was still listed at a current address in Alabama. She hit dial. It rang once. Twice. Then someone answered. A low male voice. Calm. Too calm. Hello. Mara steadied her breath. Mr. Carter, this is Detective Mara Vance. I'm with the Split Creek Sheriff's Office. I need to ask you some questions about your family. A pause. I was wondering when you'd call, he said. Click. The line went dead. March 20th, 2024. Location: Mobile, Alabama. Thomas Carter lived in a pale green ranch house at the edge of Mobile, Alabama, tucked behind a faded Baptist chapel and a dry field of browning weeds. When Detective Mara Vance stepped out of the rental car, heat rose from the driveway in shimmering waves. The place looked ordinary, windows curtained, an American flag faded to pink flapping on the porch. But nothing about Thomas Carter was ordinary anymore. Not after what she'd found. Not after what he'd said on the phone. I was wondering when you'd call. She knocked twice. No answer. She knocked again, louder. The door creaked open an inch. Mr. Carter, she called out. This is Detective Vance. I'm with the Split Creek Sheriff's Office. We spoke briefly the other day. Silence. Then a voice, low and flat. You came all this way to dig up the dead? Mara pushed the door wider and stepped inside. The air was thick and still. The house smelled like mothballs and old paper. Every window was drawn shut. Religious tracts were stacked in piles along the walls. A photo of the Carter children, Casey, Annie, Benji, Darla, Caleb, sat on the mantel. The glass cracked but not replaced. Thomas Carter stood in the hallway, backlit by a bare bulb. His face had aged hard. Lines carved deep into his cheeks, hair thinned but combed with care. I don't have anything to say to you, he said. I think you do, Mara replied. You disappeared from Split Creek the day after your children went missing. You never returned, never helped with the search. You were named in your mother's journal as a keeper in the Mobile branch. You're going to talk to me, Mr. Carter, because I think you know exactly what happened to your children. He didn't move, didn't blink. Then finally, he said, Come downstairs. The basement stairs groaned under Mara's feet. At the bottom, the space opened into a cool, windowless room. Cinder block walls, a cement floor, a single wooden chair beneath a bulb that buzzed like a dying insect. But what chilled her wasn't the chair. It was the wall. A mural, hand-painted, stretching corner to corner. 5 childlike figures holding hands in a circle, beneath a sky of crude stars. In the center of the circle was a symbol Mara recognized instantly from the dig site. The spiral with 5 arms. The circle. The covenant, Thomas said, stepping beside her. You did this? My father taught it to me. Said the world was cracking, that only the covenant kept the darkness out. The children were the offering. Each circle had to be complete. 5 points. That's why he took them in 5s. Always 5. Mara turned to him. You're talking about ritual sacrifice. I'm talking about order. His eyes were wide now, hands trembling. When we stopped, when the last circle was broken, everything started to rot. The crops, the land. My brother died. My wife left. You think it's coincidence? Thomas, she said carefully, what happened to your children? He looked away. They weren't mine to keep. They belonged to the circle. Mara stepped closer. Did you take them? He didn't answer. She took out her phone and pressed play on a recording. Bertie's journal entry, August 10th. All 5 cried again. Samuel angry. Locked cellar. My hands shook too much to braid Darla's hair. Thomas's face twitched. I begged him not to do it that time, he whispered. Said the circle was full, that 5 wasn't necessary, again so soon. But he wouldn't listen. He said the spirits had spoken to him, that the land was hungry again. You let him take your children. His hands curled into fists. Mara took a slow breath. Thomas, she said, voice level. There are other tapes, other names, other children. Were you distributing them? No, he said instantly. Not me. I never filmed anything. That was... He stopped. That was who? Thomas licked his lips. There was another family. In Texas Hill Country. We called them the North Branch. They took over the recordings after '83. Said the Carter line was too exposed. Said Birdie had grown sloppy. We passed the circle to them. You passed it on. They promised they'd keep it pure. But they started selling the tapes, turning it into profit, desecration. That's when the sickness started. Mara stepped back, pulse pounding. How many branches are there? Thomas looked up at her, his voice low and hoarse. There were 12. Back at the mobile field office, Mara briefed the federal task force. Thomas Carter had been detained for obstruction and failure to report abuse. They didn't have enough to charge him with murder yet, but they had enough to start tracing the branches. The circle was no longer a local case. It was a network, a system, a multi-generational cult that operated in cells, tied together by ritual language, shared symbols, and the systematic disappearance of children across rural communities. The children in the cistern had only been one circle. There were others. Later that evening, alone in her hotel room, Mara pulled up the Polaroid she'd taken from Birdie's bedroom wall. 5 children. Not the Carter kids. Different faces. Different time. But the eyes had been scratched out in the exact same way. She flipped the photo over. A name, handwritten in faded ink. Circle 3, Savannah. And a date. April 17th, 1975. Tomorrow, she'd request the missing persons records from Georgia. Tonight, she stared at the photo until sleep finally came. But even in sleep, she dreamed of the spiral, the circle of 5, the hole in the earth that never stopped taking. March 22nd, 2024. Location, Pine Bend, Georgia. The pine forest behind Hillstone Baptist Church had always been thick with stories. The kids from Pine Bend said the woods were haunted, by Civil War deserters, by witches, by something that whispered in the dark. But none of them ever mentioned what Detective Mara Vance now knew had been buried there. She stood at the tree line, cold wind pushing against her coat, staring at the coordinates tied to the back of that 1975 Polaroid. 5 children. Eyes scratched out. A symbol in the dirt behind them that matched the one found at the Carter farm. This wasn't just a coincidence. This was Circle 3. And according to Thomas Carter, there had been 12. The field agent assigned to Georgia, Special Agent Nash, was already waiting with a forensic team and a cadaver dog. The church's pastor had given them access to the property without protest. He claimed the back acreage had been unused for decades. Mara stepped carefully over brambles, following Nash into the clearing beyond the old footpath. That's where she saw it. A depression in the earth, subtle but deliberate. A flattened circle of dead pine needles surrounded by 5 weathered stones, each roughly the size of a cinder block. Someone had arranged them long ago. They'd sunk halfway into the mossy soil. The stones marked the points of the pentagonal pattern. Another circle, another offering site. Ground soft here, the lead forensic tech said. Could be voids underneath. The dog barked, once sharply, then began pawing at the base of the center stone. Mara turned away. She already knew what they'd find. 4 hours later, they'd unearthed 4 sets of juvenile remains. The 5th grave was empty, or never filled. Maybe they didn't complete the circle, Nash said. Or maybe one of them escaped. Mara didn't respond. Instead, she looked at the pine trees surrounding them, at the way they leaned inward, as if reaching toward the center. The entire forest felt slanted, like it knew what had happened here, like it remembered. Back at the Georgia Bureau of Investigation's temporary outpost, Mara reviewed the files of the 4 likely matches. Emily Ray Brighton, 8, missing April 1975. Dylan Harris, 7, missing May 1975. Joanna Keel, 9, missing March 1975. Lucas Page, 10, missing April 1975. Each disappearance had been treated separately. Different counties, no pattern seen, no connection made, until now. But the 5th child, the one never recovered? That question lingered. Mara traced the open files, cross-referencing with yearbook archives and VBS rosters from Hillstone Church. And there it was, tucked in the corner of a class photo dated April 1975. Tessa Elwood, age 9. Big smile. Side ponytail. Last seen April 16th, the day before the photo was dated. It didn't make sense. How could she have been in the photo smiling if she disappeared the night before? Unless the photo was taken after she went missing, or unless the date was wrong. She flipped the photo over. Something faint in pencil. Circle 3, taken. 4, complete. 5th, resisted. Camera stopped working, kept image anyway. Her hands trembled. Tessa had been targeted, but something had gone wrong. And someone had documented it anyway. They weren't just killing, they were curating. That night, Mara called the number listed for Tessa Elwood's brother, now in his 50s. He lived in North Carolina. Still remembered the day his sister vanished. She'd gone to church. Never came home. But there was one thing he told Mara that chilled her to the bone. About 2 weeks after she vanished, a man came to the house. Said he was from the church, offered my mother an envelope. Said it was a love gift to help with grieving. My mom threw it back in his face. What was in it? Cash, new bills, and a drawing. A drawing of 5 kids holding hands in a circle. My sister was in the middle, you could tell by the ponytail. Mara gripped the phone tighter. Do you still have it? There was a pause. Then, I think so. The next day, the brother overnighted the envelope. Inside, $500 in 1975 currency, unmarked, and a piece of sketch paper, yellowed and folded. When Mara opened it, her breath caught. 5 children, 5 stick figures, but one was drawn in red, unlike the rest. The one in the middle, the one with the ponytail. That night, she laid all the evidence out on her motel bed. Carter's mural, Bertie's journals, the scratched-out Polaroids, the circle drawings, the tapes, the graves, 12 sites, 12 spirals, always 5 children, always the symbol, always a final entry. Circle closed, except the Georgia one hadn't been, and neither had Split Creek, which meant whoever had been continuing the circles, they were doing it wrong. Or maybe, just maybe, they were trying to finish what had never been completed. Mara stood and looked in the mirror. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, but her resolve was steel. Tomorrow she'd return to Texas, because the original circle, the first, had never been found. And if she could find it, maybe, just maybe, she could stop the others from finishing it. March 24th, 2024. Location: Split Creek, Texas. The oldest maps of Split Creek didn't list property lines. They listed land claims, deeds filed by ranchers and squatters, names handwritten in looping cursive beside creeks, ridgelines, and dry lake beds. Detective Mara Vance sat hunched in the back of the town records office, fingers tracing a brittle 1947 surveyor's map laid across 2 folding tables. Most of the names meant nothing, but near the bottom corner, just below a slope labeled Burnt Ridge, she found it. Carter, East Field Tract, uninhabited after 1952. An arrow pointed to a fenced-off plot half a mile east of the present-day Carter farm. It wasn't on any modern land registry. No structures, no road access, just brushland. And the date beside the notation, Circle 1, initiated. The handwriting matched the margin notes from Bertie's journal. That afternoon, Mara and 2 deputies pushed their way through waist-high switchgrass under a baking Texas sun. GPS coordinates took them to a patch of broken earth and dead yucca, a place no one had touched in decades. Deputy Rosales bent down first. "Something here," he said. "Concrete, not a slab, like a cap." They cleared away the dirt with gloved hands and shovels. There it was. A flat, round lid, cast iron, rusted, bolted into a cracked ring of poured concrete. Faint lines had been scratched across the surface, concentric spirals, and in the center, 5 X-shaped runes. "Seal it up and bury it," Mara whispered, reading the faintest line of etched words. "Only the first shall remain closed until the final is complete." She stepped back. They had found Circle 1. The forensic team arrived within the hour. Cutting into the cap took most of the day. Mara stood by as the final bolt snapped with a shriek of metal. The lid groaned. The smell hit them like a wall. Old earth. Rot. Time. Inside the chamber was a stone-lined pit, circular and deep. But unlike the cistern, this one had been deliberately arranged. 5 child-sized indentations, like nests carved in clay. Each cradled skeletal remains. But what horrified them wasn't the bones. It was the objects placed in each child's arms. A doll made of bundled twine, a polished animal skull, a hand-drawn map, a white feather tied with red thread, a small iron key. "What the hell is this?" Rosales whispered. "Ritual objects," Mara said. "Tokens, offerings." And at the base of the pit, between the bones, they found a wooden plaque, sealed in wax, still legible. "Circle 1 complete, 1952. We give these 5 unto the earth, that the foundation may be set. Let those who come after build the remaining 11 in honor of the keeper. Let the cycle not be broken. S.C. Samuel Carter." That night, Mara sat in the evidence room, staring at a list. 12 circles, 8 confirmed sites, including Split Creek and Georgia. 4 unaccounted for. What if those 4 hadn't happened yet? What if someone, Thomas or others, had tried to continue the ritual after Samuel died, but failed to complete the cycle? And what if the original plan had required all 12 to be fulfilled? It wasn't just about abduction or abuse anymore. It was about completion, a closed system. She pulled up the VHS tapes again. One stood out, labeled Circle 12, pending, date, blank. The tape was mostly static. Then one frame, blurred, a child standing in a room painted red. A single candle on the floor, and a voice, distorted and muffled. "Soon, the wheel will turn. The last 5 will make it whole." Mara made the call at 10:47 p.m. to the FBI liaison, Special Agent Dobbins. "We're wrong," she said. "This isn't about a legacy. It's not even about faith." "Then what is it?" Mara's voice dropped. "It's a countdown." And someone was still trying to finish the last circle. March 25th, 2024. Location, multiple. Texas, Louisiana. The last circle was already in motion. Detective Mara Vance knew it in her gut, the way a storm announces itself in the bones, long before the clouds gather. The Circle 12 tape was real. The objects in the chamber at the first circle had meaning. The drawings, the dates, the rituals. They weren't just historical. They were instructions. And someone was still following them. The FBI's digital forensics team isolated a frame from the Circle 12 VHS. The child's face was blurred, but the background, red walls, old window trim, peeling blue door, matched the architectural style of a closed Catholic orphanage in Louisiana. St. Dimphna's Home for Children, shuttered in 1998 after a string of unexplained disappearances. The building still stood, condemned, boarded up, still owned on paper by a defunct religious nonprofit. Mara and Special Agent Dobbins arrived at dawn. The front doors were chained. The interior smelled of mildew and rot. Inside, the nursery was a mirror image of the tape. Red walls, a melted candle on the floor, and symbols, freshly drawn, scratched into the floorboards with chalk and something darker. Blood. They found the first child upstairs in what had once been the chapel. Alive, drugged, wrapped in a sheet. A boy, maybe 10 years old, malnourished and shaking. He spoke little, but he whispered one phrase again and again. We were the 5. I was the feather. The feather. Like the token found in the first circle burial chamber. Back at the FBI field office in Shreveport, a multi-agency task force formed instantly. 4 more children were missing across Texas and Louisiana over the past 60 days. Cases not yet connected. Braden Lee, age 9, missing from San Antonio. Lucia Mercado, age 11, vanished in Houston. Thomas T.J. Blackwood, age 7, disappeared from a church parking lot in Nacogdoches. Adelina Bright, age 10, last seen leaving a foster home in Lafayette. Each child had something strange in common. They'd all reported recurring dreams before their disappearance. Nightmares described to therapists or foster parents involving circles, dark rooms, or a man with no face but a voice that prayed. Somehow, the perpetrator had influenced them in advance. Mara stared at the case board. Someone was finishing Samuel Carter's cycle. Someone who still believed the 12th circle had to be completed, and they had 4 of the 5 children. The last, the boy found in the orphanage, had escaped or been let go. Mara revisited the journals from Bertie's cellar, tracing every reference to the final cycle. One passage stood out. The last will mirror the first. Tokens must match: the map, the doll, the skull, the key, the feather. 1 token per child, 1 keeper to bind them, 1 place to finish. Mara whispered the words aloud. 1 place to finish. She flipped to Samuel Carter's original map from 1952, buried with the first circle. In the lower corner, almost invisible in faded ink, Circle 12 site, Eden's Gate. Eden's Gate wasn't on any official map, but it showed up in one place. A Carter family land deed from 1939. It was the name given to a private plot, a wooded area near the Sabine River, miles from any paved road. A forgotten campsite where Samuel's grandfather had once taken his sons to commune with God. It was still in the Carter family name. No one had visited it in over 60 years. Until now. A convoy of black SUVs tore through the back roads of eastern Texas as dusk fell. Mara sat in the lead vehicle, shotgun in her lap, heart pounding. The GPS marked the turnoff, a narrow trail just wide enough for 1 vehicle. Trees closed in overhead. The light dimmed to a bluish gray. They parked half a mile out, proceeded on foot. The air smelled of cedar and stagnant water. Then they saw it. A clearing, and in the center, 5 wooden stumps arranged in a circle. Each stump held a crude object, a map burned around the edges, a twine doll soaked in something dark, a polished skull resting on a silk cloth, a small brass key, a white feather singed at the tip. The stumps were surrounded by shallow trenches, graves not yet filled. Agent Dobbins raised her hand. "We've got movement, east side." Flashlights snapped on. 2 men emerged from the trees, both armed. One of them was Matthew Tenko. The other, Thomas Carter, older now, worn, smiling like a man walking into a church. "Too late," he called out. "They've been chosen. You can't stop it now." "Drop your weapons," Dobbins shouted, but neither man complied. Thomas raised his voice. "We are the final keepers. This land is ready." And then, gunfire. A flash from the tree line. Dobbins went down. Mara dropped, rolled, fired. Tenko fell, chest hit. Thomas ran. Agents charged the clearing. One trench had already been filled. A small hand stuck out from the dirt. A cry came from the brush, a child's voice. They followed it, through thorns, branches, mud. There, Adelina Bright, tied to a tree, eyes wide. Mara cut her loose. "You're safe," she whispered. "You're safe." But she wasn't sure she believed it. Not yet. Not until they found all 5. By dawn, 2 children were recovered. One trench contained remains. One trench still empty. And Thomas Carter was gone, vanished into the trees like a ghost. The final circle wasn't complete, but Mara knew what he was trying to do. Finish it. Close the loop his father had started 70 years ago, and somewhere out there, one child was still missing, one trench still waited, and Thomas was still digging. March 26th, 2024. Location, East Texas, Sabine River Basin. The sun was barely up when the manhunt began. Helicopters from the Texas Department of Public Safety circled the thick pine canopy above the Sabine Basin. K-9 units from multiple counties swept ravines and ravaged game trails. Search parties moved with rifles drawn and radios hissing, chasing the one man who still held the final piece, Thomas Carter, the last known keeper, and the only person who knew where the 5th child was. Detective Mara Vance stood in the center of the desecrated clearing, staring down at the final trench, still open, still waiting. The symbolism was undeniable. Thomas hadn't finished the circle. Not yet, but he hadn't given up either. The other recovered children, Braden, Lucia, and Adelina, were safe and in custody, reunited with frantic families, drugged, dehydrated, but alive. Each remembered different pieces, whispered prayers, candles, rooms painted red, and a man who told them they'd be part of something holy. But one boy remained unaccounted for. T.J. Blackwood, age 7. Taken from a church parking lot in Nacogdoches 2 weeks earlier, he was the final token. At 10:41 a.m., a bloodhound unit caught a scent leading northeast, toward an abandoned hunting lodge near the river bend, a place once owned by the Carter family, but left to rot after Samuel's death. The structure barely stood anymore. Its porch caved in, shutters dangling like broken wings. The front door was ajar. Mara arrived with SWAT trailing behind. Inside, the floor creaked with every step. Old religious pamphlets littered the floor. Animal bones, hand-carved symbols, dried herbs hanging from the rafters. And in the corner, a child's jacket, blue, tiny, TJ's, still warm. They found footprints leading out the back of the lodge, adult-sized, dragging something heavy. They ran through the underbrush, down a slope slick with moss and rotting leaves, toward a river cave cut into the limestone. It was half submerged, dark, echoing, cold, and inside, it stank of candle wax and decay. Mara ducked into the narrow mouth, flashlight cutting through the gloom. Drips echoed like whispers. A shape moved ahead, slowly, deliberately. Thomas Carter, dragging something behind him, a burlap sack. "Thomas!" Mara shouted. Her voice cracked off the walls. He didn't stop walking. "You don't have to do this," she said. "You didn't finish the circle. You've already broken it." He turned. His eyes were hollow. Skin pale, mud smeared across his face like ash. "You don't understand," he said. "They won't sleep, not until the 12th is sealed. The old blood, it's on my hands. It always was." Mara stepped forward, careful, calm. "The blood stops here," she said. "Let him go." She saw movement in the bag. A small hand, still moving, still alive. Thomas reached into his coat. Mara raised her weapon. He didn't pull a gun. He pulled out a key, small, iron, old, the same shape as the one found in the original burial chamber. "I was the key," he said. "Samuel gave it to me when I was 7. Told me I'd open the last door when the time came. But I waited. I waited too long." "Drop it, Thomas." His hand trembled. "I buried them, all of them. I remember every name, every scream, and I still hear them, even now." He knelt down, pressed the key to the stone floor. Then finally, he cried. SWAT moved in. TJ was pulled from the sack, shaken but alive, blinking in the dim light. He clutched Mara's coat and didn't let go. Thomas Carter was arrested without resistance. For the first time in 41 years, every known child connected to Circle 12 had been found, and every trench stood empty. That night, as Mara stood outside the hospital where TJ was being treated, she stared up at the stars. 12 circles, hundreds of names, dozens of victims who would never come home. But the chain had broken, not by fire or force, but by survival, by one child escaping, and by the last keeper deciding not to finish what his father began. By dawn, 2 children were recovered. One trench contained remains, one trench still empty. And Thomas Carter was gone, vanished into the trees like a ghost. The final circle wasn't complete, but Mara knew what he was trying to do. Finish it. Close the loop his father had started 70 years ago, and somewhere out there, one child was still missing, one trench still waited, and Thomas was still digging. March 26, 2024. Location, East Texas, Sabine River Basin. The sun was barely up when the manhunt began. Helicopters from the Texas Department of Public Safety circled the thick pine canopy above the Sabine Basin. K-9 units from multiple counties swept ravines and ravaged game trails. Search parties moved with rifles drawn and radios hissing, chasing the one man who still held the final piece, Thomas Carter, the last known keeper, and the only person who knew where the 5th child was. Detective Mara Vance stood in the center of the desecrated clearing, staring down at the final trench, still open, still waiting. The symbolism was undeniable. Thomas hadn't finished the circle. Not yet. But he hadn't given up either. The other recovered children, Braden, Lucia, and Adelina, were safe and in custody, reunited with frantic families, drugged, dehydrated, but alive. Each remembered different pieces, whispered prayers, candles, rooms painted red, and a man who told them they'd be part of something holy. But one boy remained unaccounted for. TJ Blackwood, age 7. Taken from a church parking lot in Nacogdoches 2 weeks earlier. He was the final token. At 10:41 a.m., a bloodhound unit caught a scent leading northeast, toward an abandoned hunting lodge near the River Bend, a place once owned by the Carter family, but left to rot after Samuel's death. The structure barely stood anymore. Its porch caved in, shutters dangling like broken wings. The front door was ajar. Mara arrived with SWAT trailing behind. Inside, the floor creaked with every step. Old religious pamphlets littered the floor. Animal bones, hand-carved symbols, dried herbs hanging from the rafters. And in the corner, a child's jacket. Blue, tiny, TJ's, still warm. They found footprints leading out the back of the lodge, adult-sized, dragging something heavy. They ran through the underbrush, down a slope slick with moss and rotting leaves, toward a river cave cut into the limestone. It was half submerged, dark, echoing, cold, and inside, it stank of candle wax and decay. Mara ducked into the narrow mouth, flashlight cutting through the gloom. Drips echoed like whispers. A shape moved ahead, slowly, deliberately. Thomas Carter, dragging something behind him, a burlap sack. "Thomas!" Mara shouted. Her voice cracked off the walls. He didn't stop walking. "You don't have to do this," she said. "You didn't finish the circle. You've already broken it." He turned. His eyes were hollow, skin pale, mud smeared across his face like ash. "You don't understand," he said. "They won't sleep, not until the 12th is sealed. The old blood..." It's on my hands. It always was. Mara stepped forward, careful, calm. The blood stops here, she said. Let him go. She saw movement in the bag. A small hand. Still moving, still alive. Thomas reached into his coat. Mara raised her weapon. He didn't pull a gun. He pulled out a key, small, iron, old, the same shape as the one found in the original burial chamber. I was the key, he said. Samuel gave it to me when I was 7. Told me I'd open the last door when the time came. But I waited. I waited too long. Drop it, Thomas. His hand trembled. I buried them, all of them. I remember every name, every scream, and I still hear them, even now. He knelt down, pressed the key to the stone floor. Then finally, he cried. SWAT moved in. TJ was pulled from the sack, shaken but alive, blinking in the dim light. He clutched Mara's coat and didn't let go. Thomas Carter was arrested without resistance. For the first time in 41 years, every known child connected to Circle 12 had been found, and every trench stood empty. That night, as Mara stood outside the hospital where TJ was being treated, she stared up at the stars. 12 circles, hundreds of names, dozens of victims who would never come home. But the chain had broken, not by fire or force, but by survival, by one child escaping, and by the last keeper deciding not to finish what his father began. By dawn, 2 children were recovered. One trench contained remains, one trench still empty. And Thomas Carter was gone, vanished into the trees like a ghost. The final circle wasn't complete, but Mara knew what he was trying to do. Finish it. Close the loop his father had started 70 years ago, and somewhere out there, one child was still missing, one trench still waited, and Thomas was still digging. March 26th, 2024. Location, East Texas, Sabine River Basin. The sun was barely up when the manhunt began. Helicopters from the Texas Department of Public Safety circled the thick pine canopy above the Sabine Basin. K-9 units from multiple counties swept ravines and ravaged game trails. Search parties moved with rifles drawn and radios hissing, chasing the one man who still held the final piece, Thomas Carter, the last known keeper, and the only person who knew where the 5th child was. Detective Mara Vance stood in the center of the desecrated clearing, staring down at the final trench, still open, still waiting. The symbolism was undeniable. Thomas hadn't finished the circle. Not yet. But he hadn't given up either. The other recovered children, Braden, Lucia, and Adelina, were safe and in custody, reunited with frantic families, drugged, dehydrated, but alive. Each remembered different pieces, whispered prayers, candles, rooms painted red, and a man who told them they'd be part of something holy. But one boy remained unaccounted for, TJ Blackwood, age 7. Taken from a church parking lot in Nacogdoches 2 weeks earlier. He was the final token. At 10:41 a.m., a bloodhound unit caught a scent leading northeast, toward an abandoned hunting lodge near the River Bend, a place once owned by the Carter family, but left to rot after Samuel's death. The structure barely stood anymore. Its porch caved in, shutters dangling like broken wings. The front door was ajar. Mara arrived with SWAT trailing behind. Inside, the floor creaked with every step. Old religious pamphlets littered the floor. Animal bones, hand-carved symbols, dried herbs hanging from the rafters. And in the corner, a child's jacket. Blue, tiny, TJ's, still warm. They found footprints leading out the back of the lodge, adult-sized, dragging something heavy. They ran through the underbrush, down a slope slick with moss and rotting leaves, toward a river cave cut into the limestone. It was half submerged, dark, echoing, cold, and inside, it stank of candle wax and decay. Mara ducked into the narrow mouth, flashlight cutting through the gloom. Drips echoed like whispers. A shape moved ahead, slowly, deliberately. Thomas Carter, dragging something behind him, a burlap sack. "Thomas!" Mara shouted. Her voice cracked off the walls. He didn't stop walking. "You don't have to do this," she said. "You didn't finish the circle. You've already broken it." He turned. His eyes were hollow, skin pale, mud smeared across his face like ash. "You don't understand," he said. "They won't sleep, not until the 12th is sealed. The old blood, it's on my hands. It always was." Mara stepped forward, careful, calm. "The blood stops here," she said. "Let him go." She saw movement in the bag. A small hand. Still moving, still alive. Thomas reached into his coat. Mara raised her weapon. He didn't pull a gun. He pulled out a key, small, iron, old, the same shape as the one found in the original burial chamber. "I was the key," he said. "Samuel gave it to me when I was 7. Told me I'd open the last door when the time came. But I waited. I waited too long." "Drop it, Thomas." His hand trembled. "I buried them, all of them. I remember every name, every scream, and I still hear them, even now." He knelt down, pressed the key to the stone floor. Then finally, he cried. SWAT moved in. TJ was pulled from the sack, shaken but alive, blinking in the dim light. He clutched Mara's coat and didn't let go. Thomas Carter was arrested without resistance. For the first time in 41 years, every known child connected to Circle 12 had been found, and every trench stood empty. That night, as Mara stood outside the hospital where TJ was being treated, she stared up at the stars. 12 circles, hundreds of names, dozens of victims who would never come home. But the chain had broken, not by fire or force, but by survival, by one child escaping, and by the last keeper deciding not to finish what his father began. At dawn, Thomas Carter gave his full confession. Names, dates, burial sites, branch leaders, rituals, tapes, maps, tokens. He said the circles began in 1952 with 5 children chosen by Samuel Carter, buried beneath what would become the family's eastern field. Each new generation of keepers believed continuing the ritual preserved the balance between the living and the land. But the truth was simpler. It was control, power, obsession, and fear. He said his father believed something would come if the cycle wasn't completed, something from beneath. He never knew what, but he believed it so deeply that he gave everything, even his own blood. Mara wrote the final words in her report just after midnight. Circle 12. Aborted. All known victims recovered or confirmed deceased. Primary perpetrator in custody. Cult infrastructure dismantled across 4 states. Case closed. But she left one line open, because not every name had been recovered, and not every circle had been mapped. The truth, she knew, was this. There may have been more than 12. March 30th, 2024. Location, Split Creek, Texas. The land behind the Carter farm was quiet now. No police tape, no search parties, no helicopters overhead. Just the wind moving low through the grass, and the faint sound of insects returning to a field that had, for too long, held its breath. Detective Mara Vance stood at the edge of the cistern pit, now drained, excavated, and cordoned with flags. The forensics tents were gone, the bones recovered, the evidence bagged. But even now, as the sun rose behind her, the earth still felt heavy. Watching. She crouched down and ran her hand over the dirt beside the cistern rim. Cold, damp, and somehow remembering. In the weeks since Thomas Carter's arrest, the scope of the investigation had grown beyond anything Mara imagined. The FBI uncovered 17 unmarked sites across 4 states. 4 surviving keepers had been taken into custody, all elderly, all disoriented and fractured by age or ideology. Most believed the rituals had stopped decades ago. They were wrong. The circle doctrine, as they called it internally, spanned over 70 years and was passed down like scripture, memorized, protected, and spread like wildfire across rural church groups and isolated families. The symbols, the tokens, the language. It wasn't superstition. It was indoctrination. And it had claimed the lives of at least 47 children. That number was still climbing. Back at the temporary command center, Mara stood before a corkboard layered in string, faces, old photographs, and circled dates. The earliest known, 1952. The latest attempted, 2024. 72 years. Thomas Carter's confession had closed the last active circle, but one question still gnawed at her. Who wrote the rules? Because Samuel Carter might have begun the rituals in East Texas, but several of the oldest entries in Birdie's journal referenced a book, a handwritten manual passed down through the family. And that book was missing. On her final day in Split Creek, Mara visited the Split Creek Public Library, more out of instinct than reason. An elderly volunteer, Ms. Givens, helped her comb through the microfiche of old newspaper articles from the 1950s and 60s. That's when she found it. A 1961 article titled, "Local Pastor Warns of Demonic Doctrine in Carter Hollow," by Ellis T. Vernon, senior correspondent in the piece. Pastor James Harlan of New Hope Chapel claimed a dark theology had taken root in nearby homesteads, described as a false covenant practiced in secret, involving children, fire circles, and an old book with a broken spine. No follow-up was ever published. 2 years later, Harlan was found drowned in the Split Creek Reservoir. His death was ruled accidental. Mara drove to the chapel's remains that evening. Just a stone foundation now. No roof, no altar. Ivy growing where pews once stood. She wandered the ruins, unsure what she was looking for, until she saw it. A trapdoor, rusted shut, buried beneath dead leaves. With effort, she pried it open. The cellar beneath was dry, dusty, undisturbed, and there, wrapped in oilcloth on a shelf, was a black book with a cracked leather spine. She opened it. No title. Inside, the same spiral symbols. The 5-pointed diagrams, hand-drawn illustrations of children holding tokens, instructions, Circle 1, Circle 2, through 12, and then Circle 13, unwritten. The page was blank. She took the book and returned to the Carter farm at dawn. She burned it, alone. Watched the pages curl in the flames, watched the ink melt and the pages darken, and when it was ash, she scattered it into the cistern. The fire took nothing back, but the dirt, at last, felt still. 2 weeks later, Mara returned home. The case had gone national. Documentaries, podcasts, true crime specials. They called it the Circle Cult. She didn't watch any of them. She just kept a photograph above her desk, faded and cracked. The one taken from Birdie Carter's wall. 5 children holding hands in a field. Each now identified, each now buried with a name. Some stories don't end. They just sink deeper, waiting to be dug up again. But this one she buried. Deep, because the dirt doesn't forget. But sometimes, if you're lucky, it forgives. April 20th, 2024. Location, Split Creek, Texas. The Carter property was sold to the county 2 weeks after the final body was recovered. The farmhouse was bulldozed. The barn, too. The land was cleared, fenced, and marked with a wooden sign hand-carved by a local carpenter. Memorial Field, in memory of the lost, dedicated to the children who never came home. No names were listed, just a spiral of 5 smooth stones embedded in the soil, simple, clean, silent. In a corner of the field, wildflowers had begun to bloom again. Bluebonnets, Indian paintbrush, sunflowers that hadn't grown here in years. Locals said the soil was bad, but something had changed. Some said it was the new drainage. Others said it was the light, but most just said nothing at all. Detective Mara Vance visited the field one final time before transferring to another case. She stood at the edge of the old cistern site, hands in her coat pockets, watching the last orange light of day dip below the trees. A little boy stood near the stones, maybe 6 or 7, alone, barefoot, quiet. He turned to look at her, smiled, then faded into the dusk like he'd never been there. Mara didn't call out. She just whispered, "You're free now," and let the dark take the field.